Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
Brad Olsen, welcome back to Coast AM. How are you?
Hey, Richard. I'm doing great. Nice to hear your voice and talk with you again.
Likewise. Now, where are you actually in Terra del Fuego, or are you en route to Terra del Fuego?
I am en route. Right now, I'm in San Carlos de Bariloche.
Oh.
Lake region of Patagonia. So I'm only about 10 hours away. But it's so beautiful here. I feel like I'm in the Bavarian highlands. In fact, there is quite a bit of Bavarian architecture around here, very Germanic influence in this area. And I got to tell you, I've been to the area of Birch's Garden where Hitler had his eagle's nest. And I'm telling you, this is like a dead ringer here. They got the Kling Sea in Bavaria, and here we have the Lago Noel Huapi, which is this beautiful glacier-carved lake with white-cap mountains all around. Quite spectacular scenery here in Carlos de Bariloche.
Brad, when you get down to Terra del Fuego, first of all, are you going to be on the Chilean side or the Argentinian side of that island?
Well, there's both sides that we intend to go to. Traveling with my fiancée, Emily Infinity, and we will go to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city you can drive to in the world. And that's where all the ships leave from, not only the cruise ships, but also expedition ships. However, they also fly, and that, by the way, is on the Argentina side, but on the Chilean side is the Terra del Fuego and the airport that goes down there. So we might check that out as well, because we need to get on an expedition to make it to the Palmer base, which is the forward. Then you would go to a forward base to go see some of the anomalies that I call the Illuminati Disneyland.
Right. And how difficult is it to get passage, either by air or by sea?
Well, it's quite easy to just pay for passage, but then you're just doing the tourist route. You're just going to see penguins and icebergs. But we want to go on an expedition, and if we were to fly, then I would have to go to the Chilean side, which is just on the Straits of Magellan to Punta Arenas, and that's the airport that goes down there. And they do have regular flights, but it's usually just touch and go. I had a friend who went down there on one of the flights. You just go to a Russian base. They'll let you stay one night overnight, but then it's pretty much back on the plane and leaving. So again, you may not get past the penguins to see some of these anomalous features, which I'm going to talk about later when we get to the Antarctica.
And do you need a visa to visit Antarctica?
Not that I've heard of, and not that I know of. Antarctica is not anyone's country; it's everyone's country. That is, there are no national borders, so therefore there wouldn't be any visa requirements, or I don't even think we'd need a passport, although we'd bring it, of course, for identification purposes. But it's this autonomous continent that is not owned by anyone, but there are several dozen countries that have bases down there. And we're trying to go to the Palmer base, where we would be able to take an expedition out to the Palmer Peninsula, where I've identified something very strange at the Union Glacier, which are some of the images that I sent you. It's when there was a big data dump, remember, from Fitbit and Strava, which I use when I do my bike rides or work out. It's connected to GPS. And these two companies had a big data dump, and all the GPS information of people who was traveling to Antarctica was shown. And several of these locations, they're just doing big circles around something or geometric walkways, either an underground base. This one on the Union Glacier, which you can see on Google Earth, has an airstrip right there. Everybody's taking a snowmobile from the airstrip, going to this location, and doing like this oblong, rectangular walk around something. It's either a base or perhaps one of these giant discs. And there are supposed to be 3 massive discs, one of which I think is in the Union Glacier, 3 miles long. And the ice is now melting in Antarctica at a rapid clip. Bernie Sanders himself just tweeted recently that the Antarctic ice is melting 3 times faster than it did just 10 years ago. Now, if that's a result of global warming or the fact that there are more volcanoes in Antarctica than any other continent of the world. A lot of people don't know this. It is the world's largest active volcano system in the world with 91 active volcanoes. Some of those are below the ice, so perhaps it's the volcanoes that are melting the ice at a fast clip. But something is happening down there, and there's a lot of weird and strange anomalies, which we'll talk about, that really boggle the mind, as well as a lot of elites that are going down there as well to check something out. Maybe they're going to this Union Glacier. There's another part of the Fitbit data dump. There was another location near the Ross Ice Shelf that also showed a whole bunch of people going to this one spot and making the same trip, because you can see overlapping data of the people traveling down there. Quite fascinating.
You mentioned some dignitaries and so forth that have traveled down to this location. I believe former Secretary of State John Kerry. It is rumored that former President Barack Obama, I believe the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, all went there. What would the head of the Russian Orthodox Church be doing in the Antarctic?
Yeah, he's the Russian Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill III. Well, he says, and they all have a cover story, that he went down there to bless an Orthodox chapel. Same with actor Tom Hanks, who converted to Orthodoxy, went to go see this tiny little chapel. Then you have Buzz Aldrin, who went down there and tweeted. It was up for a short while, and people did capture the screen capture, quote, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." And this is supposedly after he saw the pyramids that are there in the Shackleton Range, another great anomaly that's created quite a bit of buzz. These 3 pyramids, Richard, are almost the same dimension as the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, which would say that there are now pyramids on every single continent of the world. But the list of dignitaries and elite and who I would call Illuminati, you mentioned John Kerry. Yeah, he's a climate champion, going down there to see the effects of climate change. Happened to be there right on Election Day when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. Now, we all know his cover story. Sounds a little suspicious, but maybe he was down there to talk to this Fourth Reich. Maybe he was going to New Schwabenland, to the base there. You mentioned putting up the National Geographic map. I'll tell you something really interesting. When I bought this map, and you can purchase them, and I got mine in leather, and I marked it up with all the locations that I knew of, Richard, my jaw dropped when I saw that it was from 1987. That's the year before the Berlin Wall dropped.
Yes.
And even on the Nat Geo map, it's called New Schwabenland. And there are West German bases that have been in existence since the time of the Third Reich, which went down there in the 1930s to claim this area, also called New Queen Maud Land, this big hump right below South Africa, another country that had fascist ties. And that is the jumping point to go to New Schwabenland from South Africa.
Right. The Germans were real pioneers in exploring the Antarctic. I think they began like the late 19th century. Even by hot air balloon, they were traveling down to the Antarctic. I think, isn't there an area known as Kaiser Wilhelm Land as well?
There is. This is that one too. Yeah, they are very much into claiming their chunk of Antarctica. I charted out on my map. People, visitors want to take a look at my handwritten notes. Anytime I could definitively find through GPS or from other resources exactly where things were, such as Point 211 or Base 211, New Berlin Base, I marked it on the map. Another really interesting feature in the New Schwabenland area, not too far away from the New Berlin Base, which, by the way, they could access under the ice with the U-boat. And Michael Sala, a colleague of mine, had a recently released image of leaked documents showing the U-boat passage under the ice to get to the New Berlin Base. But the Schumacher ponds are geothermal active ponds. And I just read the book Dark Star by Henry Stevens before I came out of this, and he was accounting when the German soldiers down there, they were planting their own food. It's the one region of Antarctica free of the ice, and with the warmer soil from the Schumacher ponds, they could grow their own food down there.
That's amazing. I wasn't aware of that.
The geothermal could also, the geothermal could also create heat, creating these domes underneath the ice, and as well as an energy source. So the Germans picked the best spot, I'd have to say, to set up their bases pre-World War II, and then now post-World War II, West Germany maintained those bases. And they're called Neumayer Base, which is on the coast, and then another one inland called Konen. And another thing that made my jaw drop when I was doing this research, I found the coordinates to some of these anomalous sites, and I'm looking for UFO craft, and this one GPS coordinates went right to where the Konen base was, and there appears to be another craft under the ice in New Schwabenland.
This one craft that you mentioned is something like on the order of 3 miles in length that is
right
now being revealed due to the retreating ice. Is this not can we not see this from Google Earth?
Well, no, you can't. In fact, we've caught Google Earth in many occasions whitewashing out some of these anomalous features, because you can use the time machine and go back with Google Earth and see what was going on there in 2016, for example, with this Konen base, and you can see this anomalous craft that's coming through the ice. Fast forward to 2018, and there's just a couple little humps on the ice that don't really look too anomalous. So either the snow is covering this stuff over, or in the case of these data dumps with Strava and Fitbit, it just looks totally whited out, like it's the side of a glacier. You can't make any connection as to what the people were doing there. But these GPS coordinates and where these people are tracing their steps, that doesn't lie. That was a data dump a little less than a year ago, and would show some of these elites going to these locations. Most notably, most recently, when Trump got elected, was Newt Gingrich, who's a big supporter of Donald Trump, and his wife, Calista Gingrich, who is now the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. So talk about some Illuminati tie-ins.
Interesting.
People heading down there. It really is interesting.
I mean, in your wildest dreams, do you expect to get close to this thing? Would they allow that?
Well, in my wildest dreams, yeah, I do dream about going down there. I was working with Emery Smith, who has some knowledge of it and actually knew the general at the Palmer base. So if I could possibly talk to him, get to Palmer, there is the possibility of getting on an expedition out to some of these forward bases where the Illuminati Disneyland features are, most notably on the Palmer Peninsula, the Union Glacier, where one of these Strava data dump showed many people doing this oblong rectangular walk around there. And he said Emery Smith was originally going to go on this trip with me. We even put up a GoFundMe site, but he's now taken over the Cosmic Disclosure show on Gaia, so he's got his hands full back in Colorado. But he told me that the forward base goes to one of the crafts, and they call it the door. And the door would be, if you're allowed to go, if you even get to the craft, into one of these mother ships. And that, I think, is the big prize of the Illuminati people going down there, is to be able to get access into one of these mothership crafts. That has got to be one of the highlights of anybody's travel career, to be able to do something like that. So I'm still holding out hope. We don't have the budget to do our own expedition. Maybe we can double up. Maybe we can get to Palmer, talk to the general, and try to get on. But I would say the odds are that I'm not going to get past the penguins who hold up the iron wall of Antarctica, Richard. You got to get past the penguins.
That's it. Yes, they're on sentry duty. What do you make of, I guess, that's it. I think it was, nearly 2 years ago, and Corey Goode said that he was taken to Antarctica to witness this excavation of these ruins from some ancient, it was a flash-frozen civilization that was buried under something like 2 miles of ice. And the discovery of the ruins apparently dates back to the first Nazi German expedition in 1939. What do you make of those claims?
Yeah, I've met Corey Goode several times at Contacting the Desert, including the first time I met him 3 years ago. First time we were both speakers there. And Linda Moulton Howe was interviewing him off the record, and he gave a very compelling, very believable account of his time in the secret space program, but also what he witnessed down in Antarctica. And he has said that he's been to the archaeological site where they're actually digging below the ice, about a mile into the ice, and finding antediluvian architecture. That is, once again, megalithic architecture that is a mile under the ice. Not only that, but they're pulling out Ice Age animals, such as woolly mammoths, giant sloths, that could only have lived before the ice was there. Not only that, but giants of another race that are human-like, but not Homo sapien human, that are 10 and 12 feet tall. He calls
with
Adamite.
Right, with elongated skulls.
With elongated skulls and wearing clothes very reminiscent of the pharaohs of Egypt, which is another very interesting tie-in. When I heard him say that, I was quite shocked to hear that. But they've also done illustrations based on what Corey told him, showing the excavation sites, showing these massive block buildings, kind of like the Osirion in Egypt, with just cyclopean architecture below the ice. This is a suggestion that Antarctica could be Atlantis.
Fascinating.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.
Thank you for joining us. This is Connie Willis on Coast to Coast AM. Hope you're doing well. So, Connie Willis here. You can find me at ConnieWillis.com, ConnieWillis.com. Brad, welcome once again to Coast to Coast. How are you doing?
Hey, Connie, I'm doing great tonight. Nice to talk to you on my lucky number 7 time on Coast to Coast.
Seventh heaven, baby. I like it too. You know, there's so many things that we can talk about with you, but I had stopped at one point because what drew me to you was so many people ask me about Antarctica. So many people. And I know it's some cool stuff's going on there, some crazy things and lots of mysteries, but I don't know enough about them. So this is just as much for me as everybody else. And I was so excited that not only do you know about it, but you've been there. It's not like you're reading it from someone else's words or anything. You've been there. So I'm so excited, Brad.
Yeah, I'm in the 7 Continent Club now, Connie, and the hardest one to reach is Antarctica. I was down there about 2.5 years ago, January and February of 2019, and took a sailboat down there.
Oh.
There were 14 of us on a 72-foot sailboat, and I was with my partner at the time, Emily Infinity. We got violently ill on the Drake Passage going over from Ushuaia, Argentina, down to the Palmer Peninsula. But once we got there and set foot on terra firma, we went to a Polish base because 11 of the people on our ship were Polish. In fact, the vessel was from Gdansk, Poland, called the Chief One. Once we got to this base, which was our first landing, it was such a relief because they welcomed us in. We brought fresh fruit and vegetables for them, which were in short supply, while they allowed us to take a shower, enjoy a couple meals with them, get on the internet. The one and only time on this trip I did, just to let everybody know we arrived safely. And one night of merrymaking with some very unique drinks being poured in glacier ice. They
cool.
And collect the blue ice from the glaciers that's really thousands of years old.
Wow.
And a very peculiar thing happens when you add alcohol and a mixer to this blue ice. It pops like popcorn. Never heard anything quite like it before. So there's all these tiny little tidbits that you get along the way that made that trip so extraordinary. But getting there was a barrier of entry. It was very difficult. On that boat trip down, Emily didn't think we were going to make it for a while, but I knew through some sailing with my dad that unless the boat's taken on water, you just weather the storm and keep going. And once we got into the sea passage lanes around the Palmer Peninsula, it was smooth going and nobody got sick after that, even on the return voyage.
That's the worst feeling in the world is being seasick. It is the worst.
Yep.
Sorry that you had to deal with that. But I would have been just as afraid too on a sailboat. Because even though you're right, unless it's taken on water, but it doesn't feel that way, especially the waters you were in. So tell us what you found out when you were there, what you did. I mean, that must have been, that's a dream to go there. Antarctica.
Yeah, it was a drain physically. I think I lost about 25 pounds because not only did I throw up all the food that I had in my stomach from the previous 2 days, but I couldn't eat for the next 3, to the point where the last day and a half, it was just dry heaves, and it was really painful. And then in rough seas, I'll tell you, the hardest thing when you just absolutely had to go to the bathroom, the biggest task of the entire day was just walking across this rocking boat cabin to make it to the bathroom, and you had to sit down no matter if you had to go 1 or 2, and it was throwing up in the sink and then doing what you had to do in the head and then making it back. And I fell more than once because the floor had gotten really slick. So you get banged up on the way. You're puking into the sink, and Boy, it was tough, but we made it. And when we got there, it was glorious. It is a land unlike no other on planet Earth. It's a frozen continent. It's over 99% covered in ice. And it's also the most volcanic continent. It has 91 active known volcanoes. And this would have the propensity to create large ice domes under the ice. So as far as I know, I'm the first researcher in this field to go down there with the express purpose of looking into all the mysteries that we've heard about on Coast to Coast.
I know. I know. That's why I was excited to talk to you. When you say, first of all, it's interesting, it's all ice. And then you talk about volcanoes and then which is amazing. It's like, wow, fire and ice right there. Okay. Interesting. But what do you mean by the domes, the ice domes? What do you mean by that?
Well, there are fault lines that crisscross the Antarctica continent. And if you go to the pictures I submitted to Coast,
yeah, great ones.
One of them shows some of those fault lines where there is a lot of melting going on around the volcano areas as well as up in the Palmer Peninsula region. Now, one of the images that I start out my presentation with, which I'll be giving a workshop at Contacting the Desert, called The Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica, the Latest Findings. And in that, one of the first slides is a NASA slide that shows areas of Antarctica that are heating up and melting very rapidly, and even the animals are changing habitats and moving around. But then there's other areas of Antarctica that are actually getting colder and raising in the level of ice. So it's quite a paradox that perhaps somehow Mother Nature has a way to balance it out, and that's why we haven't seen dramatic sea level rises.
So no climate change?
I wouldn't say that. There is very rapid change for a continent like Antarctica, which has been rock solid frozen in ice for many millennia, to have changes this rapidly. For example, we went to the Palmer base, and the chief of the base said that he's been doing this job for 20-some years. And when he first got there, it's on an island called Anvers Island. He said when you came aboard the base, you could not see the mountains off in the distance, but the glacial level has lowered so dramatically just in the last 20 years, which, as you know, in geological term is a blink of the eye. Now you can see those mountains in the distance. So that's the kind of melting that is going on in this region, as well as new islands being discovered virtually every year, including one right off of the bay from the Palmer base. And they named it Pie Island because the ice bridge that connected to Anvers Island collapsed on Pi Day about 10 years ago, and hence the name. And there is a lot of melting, as well as penguin colonies shrinking that are cold weather penguins, where more opportunistic warm weather penguins are moving into that territory, and they're fighting for the ice fish resource primarily. And so the Adelie penguins are shrinking in numbers, while the chinstrap and gentoo penguin species are increasing in numbers. So it's doing a lot of different things down there, but it is definitely moving. And if that's climate change, then I suppose that's how we can describe it.
You, when you go there, do you just, go up on the side of a rock and get off and just walk? What happens? What's that entire experience?
Sure. Well, every day we were down there was completely different, a totally new adventure. It's a bit of a misnomer to say, oh, you can't go to certain places. Actually, you could. We had to tell the Argentinian Navy our route plan as we knew it at the time before we left. We got stamped out of Argentina, and this has never happened to me before, Connie, not got stamped into anywhere else until the 26-day trip was finished and we got stamped back in to Argentina. So for 26 days, we were kind of like in no man's land. And that's what Antarctica is, especially per the Antarctica Treaty, which says in the bylaws that it will be open for science as well as discovery, which means tourism. So we could basically get into the dinghy, the Zodiac boat that we had on the Chief One, and one day we went out to see whales, one day we went to a penguin colony, other days we circled around icebergs, and the co-captain was a younger guy, and he's a bit of a risk taker, and Emily Infinity said, "Oh, it's my dream to walk on an iceberg," and he let us do it. And we've since seen videos of people doing that and the iceberg actually flipping over. So it's kind of
my
task. Yeah, oh yeah, you can die really quickly down there because the water is so cold, hypothermia sets in within minutes.
Oh, my. Now, when you had said you had some of that glacier ice, the blue, now I know the difference when I have, I can actually tell the difference of some waters, right? You know, oh, this one tastes like this. Oh, this one tastes good. You know, Avion, I always love, tastes like snow. Or always tasted like snow to me. So what did that taste like?
We didn't actually sample it ourselves, just let it melt and then drink it. But I guess you're right. It would taste like spring water. But after the Arktowski Polish-based personnel showed us that they would go out and collect their own blue ice, we started doing it ourselves. And we would take the dinghy out right up to a huge, vast glacial wall and start pecking away with our pickaxe. I'm thinking, boy, I hope we don't set off an avalanche. We'd be doomed. But we got our blue ice and had cocktails.
Oh, well, there you go. You didn't even try it as a purist. You said, hey, add some bourbon. Let's go. Well, tell us some of those mysteries. You know that's what you were going for and what we're like dying to hear.
Well, sure. And the big one is the craft, the massive craft that are supposedly locked into the ice. And with some of this melting, they're being exposed every summer. There are 3 massive crafts, and they're nicknamed by the alphabet agencies, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, nicknamed after Christopher Columbus's first 3 ships. And while we didn't get anywhere near some of the purported sites, and I have pined down to one that I think is the best piece of evidence, and those pictures are on the Coast to Coast site, at a location called the Conan Base, which is a seasonal base continued to be run by Germany, who has been there for decades. Connie, they never left after they took the New Schwabenland claims in the expedition of 1938-39. They've been there ever since. And I could make an argument that they went there because they knew that this massive craft was in this location.
How would they have known that?
Well, they were doing a flyover and surveying the land. And if you look at that area of New Schwabenland in the map that I put on the coast site, you'll see all the mountain names are named after Germans who discovered them. And the very first expedition that went inland was flown by a flight commander named Schumacher. And he landed on these ponds called the Schumacher Ponds, and they're on that old German map too. And they're geothermically heated, so they never freeze over despite the very cold temperatures. He stayed behind with the boat, was doing measurements and finding that the water got warmer as he dropped down his samples lower. Usually a thermocline is the other way around, proving that these were geothermal ponds. His expedition crew went in, and there they discovered some of the underground or under ice passages that led to where they set up the New Berlin base. It was in the Mulig-Hoffmann range of mountains, and this is a very jagged mountain range. All the mountains in this area are named after Germans who discovered them, and this is where they made their base. If I were ever to go back to Antarctica, Connie, this is where I would propose to go with a film crew and to do an expedition around this Mulling-Hoffman range and see if we can find the old base. There's another really interesting tie-in to these old German bases in Antarctica, and that is the Ark of Gabriel, which was discovered in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago when exposed to sunlight and air, emitted a huge amount of energy. The Saudis had to get rid of this thing. It was jeopardizing Mecca and the safety of the pilgrims there. Only the Russians volunteered to come and pick it up. And this is absolutely verifiable that a Russian fleet came to the Red Sea right there at Saudi Arabia and then went straight on down to Antarctica and deposited this in an old German base in New Schwabenland. So then fast forward to 2015 and 2016. Remember when all the celebrities and high-profile people were going down there, including Patriarch Krill, who the cover story was he was going to bless a little chapel there. Wow, go all that way for an elderly man just to bless a chapel about the size of a walk-in closet. But it was presumed that he was going down there to make sure that this Ark of Gabriel stayed put in the old German bunker that the Russians put it in. So that would be another thing to go down there to check out and see if we could find any evidence for where that was located. And any film crew that wants to go, maybe we should talk.
Well, what about alien life? Do you think there's any of that going on there? That was always one of the myths.
Sure, and well, then when you combine these three massive crafts, now I have to tell you that everywhere I went, from all the research stations while I was down there, as well as talking to different sea captains and anybody familiar with Antarctica, as a disclaimer, I have to say that nobody knew anything about this. Not that they were hiding anything, I just don't think they knew. A lot of people that work at those bases and the research stations, they're just seasonal workers. Some of them are college kids that are marine biologists that go down there to study the icefish, which are these species that feed the penguins and the seals that are very much important to the whole chain of life down there. So I don't think they were going down there with the same kind of intention as I had to try to look into some of these mysteries. Now, a couple things I did find out for sure. There is a no-fly zone over a large portion next to the South Pole. And now that's really interesting because that's where the purported massive hole under the ice is located that Admiral Byrd said he located on some of his flyovers of the South Pole. So big that in his diary it is purported that he felt confident to drop the plane into this massive hole in the ice. And up on the South Pole, that's the polar plateau it's called. It's 2 miles thick of solid ice. And there's this giant gaping hole not too far from the South Pole where they have this no-fly zone. And Admiral Byrd would have felt confident enough to fly his plane into, through, around, and then back out.
Wow.
And what he purportedly saw was megafauna and megaflora of another world. Now, I think the jury's still out on the Admiral Byrd diary. I would love to do a forensic dive into that and see if we could prove that it really was his handwriting. His family has released it, and it is interesting to read, but we have to verify its authenticity. But it does contribute one more data point that there is something massive under the ice. And one of Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblowers, Brian S., also said that he defied the no-fly order and flew over it and saw it and just was astonished how massive it was and how it could be hidden. Now, I've scoured Google Earth many times looking for it.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, in my presentation, I'll show you that they mask out certain regions, even quite sloppily on
big smudge.
Google Earth. Yeah, just put a white big square rectangle over a spot they don't want you to see what's down there. Just like, hey, tough luck. You don't.
Here you go. Sorry, yeah. Good try. They should write something like that along the way. Ha ha ha. Anything. It's true. I mean, you see smudges, or you just see even something as blunt, as blatant as that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and on the other hand, then there will be these other artifacts or what look like entrances to under ice bases into the mountainside. I show some pictures in the workshop that I'm going to give on the hidden anomalies of Antarctica, which look like lost antediluvian cities, 4-sided pyramids, step pyramids with steps down the middle. Mother Nature doesn't create in perfect right angles like this. So to see those on Google Earth, like almost they're giving us some hope that there could be some signs of ancient civilizations, perhaps even Atlantis. And there are a school of thought that does believe that Atlantis is under the ice of Antarctica. Of course, many reports of pyramids that are poking out through the ice, very famous ones that we've all seen on Ancient Aliens and other shows. Well, I went to talk to an adventure travel company that specializes in Antarctica. I went to their office in Punta Arenas, Chile, as well as their office in Utah. And I got to talking with their lead organizer of expeditions. And it is true. You can pretty much go wherever you want with a big enough bankroll and an idea of where you want to go. You can set your own itinerary in Antarctica. So I showed him my pictures, including the craft under the ice. And the pyramid shots, he said, were just attractive nunataks. That's the word they use. And on some maps, you can see the word nunatak being used as mountains that protrude through the ice. Now, I said, well, you've seen this pyramid flying over on their trip to Vinson Massif, which is the tallest mountain in Antarctica. There's a big group of people that go down there every summer to climb the tallest mountain because they've done all the other mountains on all the other continents. And then sometimes they're on their way to the South Pole, and they'll see this pyramid-like nunatak sticking out. And I asked the guy, well, haven't you ever landed there? Have you ever climbed it or taken a sample? It's like, no, we just fly over it. So I think the jury's still out on that one, too, that there could be another expedition in the making to go check out some of these pyramids. And like the 3 craft under the ice, there are 3 pyramid fields that I've identified. And this one is in the Shackleton Range, kind of between West Antarctica and East Antarctica.
So when are those in the booked on the calendar now?
When is it booked on the calendar?
Yeah, when are you going to go check those out and land on them and check them out and get the samples?
The last season, which is opposite seasons, of course, so our winter is their summer, all trips were canceled. The Chief one didn't sail down there again, and as far as I know, you couldn't get into Argentina or Chile to go down there. So it remains to be seen whether the season, which begins in November and goes until March, is going to be open for travel once again.
What are your theories on all these? I mean, you're looking them up, you're seeing them, you're thinking, hey, one day I'm going and I'm probably going to take Connie with me. I know that's in your mind. I know it is. And so what are your theories on this? Is there like also a triangle there in the Antarctic, or, like Alaska Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle? Is there also something known there? Or maybe that's the next discovery?
That'll have to be the next discovery. I'd say Excellent. If there was a triangle, it would probably be that South Pole area, because that gaping hole is supposed to be about 40 miles in diameter. Imagine. It's massive. And what's down there could be a total game changer. That's why the NSA has people stationed down there. Remember how we've always heard NSA, no such agency? Well, they're largely tasked with anything to do extraterrestrial. And I found out recently they have a building in the McMurdo Base Complex, which is the largest Antarctic research station down there run by the Americans. And there's one building that belongs to the NSA, and nobody knows what's in it, who goes in there, what they're all about. And they've also been known to be at the South Pole Amundsen Scott Research Station, which is just a few dozen miles away from where this massive hole under the ice is. And it's interesting that when Prince Harry went down there, one of these other elite and royal family, he did a cross-country trip from South Pole to 89-degree latitude south. They did a cross-country trip in the exact region where this gaping hole was. And leave it to a royal like Prince Harry to pull off a feat like that. There are also stories of women, these two women I remember reading in Nexus magazine, who wanted to do a cross-country trip across the polar plateau. They were getting closer and closer to the pole, and then all of a sudden these Navy SEAL helicopters came and blocked their passage and said, you're not going any further. You're going to get in this helicopter, and we're just going to take you. So they tried to protest. They said, well, we're allowed to do this, but really you're not. So they say Antarctica is fully open for the Antarctica Treaty, but there are some places that are definitely off limits.
So what did Harry say?
Oh, Harry didn't talk about that. He just went out with some of his Army buddies when he was in the military, and they just said, we're doing this cross-country ski trip, and came back. Just like John Kerry. What did John Kerry do? He went to McMurdo as well, stationed over for a day or two, went into the field for several days. Nobody knew where he went, came back, and then back to America. What's interesting about the Kerry visit, he was there on Election Day.
Brad, I'm looking at the pictures that you sent us on our website, and I was looking at the station there, the German research station, and I actually at first thought it was like a vertebrae until I was looking at it a little further. I was like, what are those? Oh, those look like maybe little people there. I don't know. How did you get this picture? Did you get it off of Google Earth yourself?
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
So you have to go to the Wayback Machine on Google Earth to find this image of the season they were excavating out there in 2013. And in the larger image, you can see a runway strip, the snowmobile tracks that come over to the out camp, a dig area, presumably with some kind of entrance down into it where they're digging around, and then another snowmobile track over to the larger grill area, which you can see in the second blow-up shot.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when after the excavation was finished, they put something over it. I'm imagining it's something like a circus tent with circus poles, because now if you go to the site, you'll see what looks like just all these tent poles sticking up out of the ice. So they covered it up over, and I think they still would have a way to get in, that this is the door that I was told, if you're able to be one of the lucky few to go out to this Conan research station in the season, that you can go into this craft. Some reports of people I've talked to about it said that they got in. Whether they're making it up or not, I don't know. But it was called the door, and it was the way into one of these large Nina Pinta or Santa Maria crafts.
Did they say what they saw?
Just some kind of massive machine-like craft under the ice.
That's all they told you, that when they went in, that's it? They didn't go any further? I mean...
Well, it's a name we all know. I'm wondering if I should mention him.
Let's go.
Emery Smith was telling me about the door into the craft before I went down there, and how I would go to Palmer Station to meet certain military people to take me there, and that wasn't really the case.
There are no military operating there as far as bases go. Now, they can come down in a logistic fashion, supply the bases of their country. They can also do emergency evacuations. But it's another misconception that there are military or any other militaries of the world are doing exercises down there, which is strictly prohibited per the Antarctica Treaty, which is fully ratified in 1961. And it turns out to be one of the best treaties that is held up over time. And it preserves the entire continent of Antarctica as a biosphere, not a national park, but really a world park that belongs to all of us. See, that's a really interesting thing about going down there, Connie. As I mentioned, you don't get stamped in when you go there. It is just this lost continent here on planet Earth that is so mysterious as far as what might be under the ice. And I did mention in the early setup that it is volcanically active, which would have the propensity of melting the ice from the underside and creating these large under-ice domes, which, when combined with the warmer air that would come from some of these geothermal features, could warm those inner cavities to a pretty comfortable temperature. Dr. Michael Sala, one of my colleagues who has done books and research on Antarctica and actually helped me with quite a bit of research going into the trip, just came out with a new video on his Exopolitics site about what's going on in Antarctica with alien races, with the Nazis, and with these under-ice domed cities that could be populated by human and or extraterrestrial.
And what are your thoughts on all this after you're out there? I mean, are you also good at picking up vibes and feelings and stuff like that? Can you pick up energies?
Yeah, I'll just tell you that Antarctica is massive in size. It's the fifth largest continent in the world. So the distances are very vast. So to try to go and investigate all these things that we discover on Google Earth or hear about elsewhere is very expensive, and there may be some areas where you're not allowed to go. My feeling is it's holding a lot of secrets, Connie. I feel in my heart that there is evidence in Antarctica that will change our outlook on who we are on this planet. That is antediluvian civilization evidence, or one of these massive crafts, or some kind of non-human race existing down there. Because let's face it, if you wanted to hide somewhere on planet Earth, apart from the deepest depths of the ocean, what's underneath Antarctica is the two biggest unknowns still remaining on this planet. The two locations that are the least explored and least in view of anybody else. So if you wanted to hide out and you could find one of these geothermal ice domes under the ice and provide your own food and whatever other technology you need to survive down there, it would be the perfect place to hang out. And that's why there is so much secrecy around certain locations in Antarctica, most especially that I found close to the South Pole area.
That huge hole. Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? I mean, that's like, the old sci-fi movies, Journey to the Center of the Earth. That's awesome.
Yeah, and we don't even really have to include extraterrestrial or megafauna or flora. We could just very easily understand that there could be a volcano that melted a big hole in the ice. That's quite plausible.
True.
And that alone would be quite amazing.
Yeah.
Now, just a few years ago, the Russians at their Vostok station, which routinely measures the coldest temperatures on planet Earth, they finally got a drill down through 2 miles of ice to Lake Vostok. And Lake Vostok is one of the top 10 largest freshwater lakes in the world that was only discovered by the Russians in 2016 when they finally got a drill through there.
Wow, they got to drill 2 miles down.
Yeah, and they have to use kerosene to keep the drill from cracking and breaking. And the first time they made it all the way through in 2012, it was a contaminated drill, so they weren't able to take a sample out of the lake. But in 2016, they did, and they looked at it under a microscope and found certain kind of bacteria that has never been seen before. And they think it comes off a fish that is still yet discovered. And another interesting tidbit to note is that Earth is really a water planet. It only has 29% landmass poking up through the ocean. If you look at the globe from the southern hemisphere with Antarctica on the bottom and then the Ring of Fire countries all the way around the globe, there's only a couple land masses in there in New Zealand and the Hawaiian Islands. It's really all water. So we're living on an ocean planet with very deep depths. We've all heard about the Mariana Trench and some of the other deepest depths. Well, another image I put on the Coast to Coast website shows Antarctica without the ice. And here you can clearly see that it's 2 continents, West Antarctica, which is fairly new at 900 million years old. We call that new, compared to the 3.3 billion-year-old East Antarctica continent landmass, which broke off from Pangaea, the megacontinent. Connie, there are species of dinosaur bones in the fossil record that have only been discovered in Antarctica, as well as flora and fauna of ferns and other tropical trees and animals that lived in Antarctica when it was a steaming jungle, certainly long before the ice. So this continent has been on the move for billions of years. That's how old East Antarctica is. And it collided with West Antarctica, this very mountainous spine that stretches down from the southern tip of South America. And through that spine is the Transantarctic Mountains, and that is where most of the volcanoes exist along those fault lines. So it's very geothermically active, and hey, I love going to hot springs, and we all know that there's all kinds of life that lives around the hot springs, even down on the very bottom of the ocean with these heat vents that produce geothermal activities. Scientists are finding at the deepest depths new forms of life as well.
So, hey, Brad, thank you so much. Number seven. Been here 7 times. Thank you so much. I'm sure you'll be back, and hope to talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Connie. Thanks for having me on. Nice talking with you.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.
Now, I wanted to touch on these pyramids that were discovered in the Shackleton mountain range, antediluvian pyramids. I mean, what evidence do we have? Do we have photographs? Again, do we have any Google Earth images? What do we have in terms of concrete evidence that these pyramids are there?
Yeah, well, it started out with photographic evidence and Google Earth evidence. I've been able to locate them in the Shackleton Range, which isn't too far from Queen Maud Land, New Schwabenland, and the Palmer Peninsula. It's about right in between the two. And they're perfectly symmetrical, four-sided, which makes it even more likely that they were crafted by some kind of intelligence. It's just not a random occurrence in the mountains there, but with a four-sided pyramid, which is symmetrical on all four sides, it's quite likely that these are part of this antediluvian civilization, possibly pyramids from the period of Atlantis. It's been said that the Great Pyramids in Egypt are much, much older than we've been led to believe, that they are a remnant of the Atlantis culture, which became the Osirian Empire. The oldest empire in Egypt started with the highest culture. Usually it's the other way around. Usually you get inferior pyramids and they get better at design and move up to the best designed ones, whereas in Egypt, the oldest pyramids, Great Pyramids, are the best designed and the only ancient wonder of the world that's still there. So if these pyramids match the size and dimension of the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau, it would suggest that what we're talking about is pyramids on all continents of the world with some kind of function, some kind of geo-function with the continent, perhaps to hold it in place after a pole shift, perhaps an energy generator, which pyramids are shown to be able to do, or perhaps another function that is still unknown. Now, I do know that one of the Ancient Aliens shows that I interviewed with, we were talking about Antarctica, and at the time, this was in 2016, they had not found a group of people that have gone out there to investigate and do samples. They said that was forthcoming, but I have not heard the results yet of that expedition. That could be happening now. You know, Richard, there's only a narrow window of time just right now, which today is the solstice. It's summer solstice down here. You only have about 3 months that you can do any kind of work or expeditions down in Antarctica. So the groups are starting to head down right now. Then by mid-February, everybody's coming back.
Right. It's permanent darkness once winter strikes.
It is, but right now it's permanent daylight, just like North Pole would be 6 months from now.
Any idea what these pyramids might be made of?
Well, it does look like they are created with blocks and perhaps some kind of mortar to hold it all together. I mean, if they're that old, they must have been very well built, possibly even megalithic design. That would certainly be on my wish list to get out there and investigate that one. And it is just across the Ronnie ice shelf from the Palmer Peninsula. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities that groups are heading out there this now Antarctic summer to go investigate.
So, Brad, is it your contention that the reason the New Schwabenland was, located where it was because it was in close proximity to the pyramids and also this large craft that's buried beneath the ice? Is that why Alfred Richer, who was this captain in the German Navy, that's why he decided this is where New Schwabenland will be?
That's a very good estimation, yeah, because the West German base called Kohnen, Kohnen, is located directly where one of these UFO crafts is located. But I think the Germans particularly chose this area because they could get the U-boats under the ice to this area where they called Point 211 or Base 211, the New Berlin base. And it is surrounded on three sides by mountains on the inland, but also because there's a major geo fault line that travels right through this area where the Schumacher ponds are. These bubbling geothermal features which would have provided, as we said earlier, energy and warmer soil to actually grow crops, grow potatoes, is what the German soldiers were doing there, according to Henry Stevens in his book. And it wasn't that bad of a life down there. You'd think living year-round in Antarctica would be terrible, but perhaps under one of these steam domes, and Corey Good also talks about another base that's more modern, using these geothermal features. And as I mentioned, Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. So there would be quite a few opportunities with 91 active volcanoes to tap into some of that geothermal energy to be used in various ways.
So, Brad, according to the theory, after the war in Europe was pretty much over, and the Americans and the British sent forces down to Antarctic, Operation High Jump, and they supposedly were confronted with these incredibly advanced, technologically advanced aerial craft. Did they encounter some alien civilization still in existence in the Antarctic, and were partnering with them in the development of these craft?
And this could be another reason why they chose this area. Perhaps there was a pre-existing ET base in New Schwabenland. But I think the story begins even earlier, a decade earlier, in Germany, in the Black Forest region. There was a famous UFO crash that was collected by the scientists of the Third Reich for the sole express purpose of backward engineering it. Not only that, but there was another craft, an even better preserved craft, that came down in fascist Italy. And Mussolini allowed the German soldiers access to that craft. So they had at least two crafts since the 1930s to work on this backward engineering technology at a location called the Skoda Works, which is in what is today the Czech Republic. And when the Russians got to this location, they're moving forward. They found no scientists, no records, no crafts, no nothing. That this was one of the most top secret and sensitive pieces of technology that the Germans had at the end of the war, that they got out of there. And they had submarines that were big enough to transport them. And when you take submarines underneath the ice, and you only pop up when you get to Antarctica, you're basically invisible. So they could have shepherded out their most sensitive technology starting in the summer of 1944 all the way to the tail end. And in this book by Henry Stevens called Dark Star, he says the final war of World War II was actually won by the Germans. And it was a submarine battle up near Iceland and Greenland when the last convoys were leaving Northern Europe and heading south to South America and Antarctica. And they routed the Allies. Well, we don't hear any of that in our history books. We only hear that we won the war in Europe and we beat the Japanese. But we don't hear that dozens of ships were sunk in the North Sea and North Atlantic region when they were getting these convoys out of Europe and heading down to the southern continents where I am right now in Terra Luce, where many living here, and it's a very Bavarian feel down here. So that and other locations in South America could have been refuges. And as my guide said when we were touring the Eden Hotel the other day, which there are pictures of Hitler having dinner with the Eichhorn family, he said that Juan Perón, the famous dictator of Argentina, was a fascist, and he had sympathies towards the Third Reich, just as they did in Chile at a period, and just as they did also in Paraguay. So the climate was right for a lot of these escaped Nazis to assume new identities, and perhaps with the money that Martin Bormann shepherded out, could have facilitated new industry, new jobs, and new lives for many of these Third Reich refugees.
The fact that the ice is retreating in the Antarctic, and if there is, in fact, this 3-mile-long alien craft revealing itself, isn't that going to force disclosure?
That is the exact reason why I'm going down there, Richard, because this could be the season where it does become wide open. There is some speculation that we have a major financial reset starting right now with the U.S. stock market taking a big dip and other indications that things are going to go south, but that Trump has a plan to reset. And one of those plans is to make this disclosure. Why? Because it would instantly get people interested in this new technology, and it could create jobs. And if he were to parlay it correctly, it not only would allow much of this technology to make its way out, but also give people this optimism that we could have some kind of new industry coming back. So this was one of the articles I was reading today in preparation for what some of the latest things that are happening down there. And we should also talk about the cosmic rays that have been observed shooting out of the surface of the ice in Antarctica. And this has scientists completely baffled. It was first detected back in 2006 when a group of scientists inflated a giant balloon intended to float over Antarctica and fitted out with sophisticated equipment. The inflatable was launched in order to detect high-energy particles arriving on Earth from space. While it was in the air, though, the balloon observed something peculiar. And now the scientific consensus and standard physics of our past century is being called into question. Why? Because the cosmic rays are coming out of the Earth in Antarctica, much like neutrinos, which can pass through the Earth. These cosmic rays are doing the same thing, and it's completely into turmoil.
Could that be hinting at some sort of power source, energy source within the Earth, which suggests, a hollow Earth?
Well, that is one of the leading theories, is that perhaps what they're detecting is some kind of power plant, that we don't understand completely how it could create these cosmic rays that would be shooting out of Antarctica, which is the only place on Earth that it's doing this. Nowhere else has it been detected like this. So it's really strange that this would be happening down there. And then, of course, you have the Russians at Lake Vostok, which is one of the largest lakes that has been discovered in the last century. It's bigger than Lake Ontario, Richard, and it's under a mile of ice. Just a dome of ice over this lake, which now they found living life in it. It's completely unique to Lake Vostok. Just another one of the many anomalies, great mysteries of Antarctica.
How can people follow your exploits? Do you have a blog, a website where they can go and read your diary entries?
Yeah, I've got a website called peacetour.com that we're putting up some content from the trip. They can follow me on Facebook or Twitter, or go to cccpublishing.com is my book publishing website. And my book, Future Esoteric and Modern Esoteric, speaks about some of these subjects and many others. I just find all these subjects that have been withheld from humanity so hugely important that I have devoted a whole series of books on esoteric subjects. And the third book that will come out in 2020 called Beyond Esoteric will have also much of this information that I'm presenting tonight, as well as my speaking lectures in 2019 on the anomalies of Antarctica and the mysteries of South America. Now,
and you also, Brad, because you're paying your own freight for this expedition, you have a GoFundMe campaign.
Yeah, we do. We put it up when I thought I was going to do this with Emory. It's still up. Yeah, you can find the GoFundMe page is still active at GoFundMe.com managed, and it's Antarctica-Olsen-Smith with Brad, Emory, and Emily. Although, maybe if we get the funding, Emory will come. But you'll see some of the images that I submitted to Coast, as well as a few others. If you would want to browse and check it out. We're still looking to get on an expedition, and that may cost some money. Emory quoted it as $639,000. Maybe we'll come up with that. We'll do our own expedition, and we'll get Emory and his wife to come on down too. But right now, we're just going to go down there and try to make this happen.
Okay, Brad, we've got to scoot here, but listen, stay safe, best of luck, and our prayers go with you. Give us a shout back when you land if you can.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.
Now, a few months ago, explorer, researcher, author, truth seeker Brad Olsen was on the program with me, live from the very tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, and he was preparing to cross the Drake Passage to the mysterious frozen continent of Antarctica. Now, he wasn't looking for a photo op with emperor penguins. He went there to find what he has called the Illuminati playground. He's back, and he'll tell us what he saw and what he experienced. A lot of people want to go to the Antarctic. Not many people get to go there. How difficult is it to travel to the Antarctic?
Well, it is very difficult, and I was able to access the numbers of all the annual visitors, and we added them up and then divided it into the 7.3 billion people living on the Earth, and it's basically 1% of 1% of every living person on the world has been to Antarctica, a very small number. And I suspect that's why we hear a lot of tall stories that come out of there, because it could be very difficult to try to verify a lot of this. If the window of opportunity of going is closing right now, you can only go from mid-November till about mid-March, and then the days are getting much shorter, and it's getting much colder, too.
All right, so take us back. Now, we had you on Coast to Coast. You were in Tierra del Fuego getting ready to cross the Drake Passage and land at a base in the Antarctic. Now, when was that? Was that December we talked, or November?
That's correct. It was actually December 21st. It was winter solstice up here, summer solstice down there.
Now, your stated goal to go to the Antarctic was to visit someplace you call Illuminati Disneyland. Explain what you mean by the Illuminati Disneyland.
Sure. Well, we've heard about a lot of notable elite visiting Antarctica in recent years, from John Kerry being there on election day to Russian Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill III, to bless an Orthodox chapel. You've got Buzz Aldrin, who allegedly tweeted, quote, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself," end quote, to possibly Barack Obama and Putin himself. You also had Great Britain's Prince Harry went on a visit that was a charity function for wounded soldiers. Everybody had a cover story going down there. But when you add that up with some of the tracking data that came back on Fitbit and Strava, it showed patterns in Antarctica at regions where people never go, or very, very few go. And the fact that many of these people, even some of the elite, were going to these very remote regions led researchers like myself to start thinking that maybe there's something down there.
Explain what you mean, Brad, but explain what you mean by Fitbit data, because I remember a couple of years ago, a couple of Christmases ago, we gave my brother-in-law a Fitbit, which you wear it around your wrist, and it helps you track the number of steps you take or the number of calories you burned or what your heartbeat is, your blood pressure, etc. But how does Fitbit data figure into Illuminati Disneyland?
Yeah, great question, and it's good to clarify that, because what happened was there was a data dump that a lot of this information had been released. And, of course, every Fitbit has a GPS tracker. So everywhere you go with it will give a marking of where you've been. So a lot of this information was released. And really all that we heard about in the above-ground media was how some of the soldiers were wearing it in Afghanistan and that they were going for jogs outside of their base in Kandahar and how they could be targets for terrorists. But we didn't hear about those Fitbit data dump people that were going down to Antarctica, and that's what I found most fascinating. Now, some of them I found were quite benign. For example, there is an expedition group that lands at a location called the Union Glacier, which is also on the Palmer Peninsula where I visited. And that's just a way station to go inland to other locations. But some of those other locations really are in the middle of nowhere. And you have to understand, Antarctica is huge. It is the 5th largest continent on the planet. It's about as big as the lower 48 United States and Canada combined. It's twice the size of Australia. So we're talking about vast distances. And when you discuss Antarctica in terms of the frozen tundra being 2 miles deep in ice, it's just enormously huge, and the distance and effort to get to these locations is extreme, and it's also extremely expensive. So people that are going there for a very good reason, because they're paying a lot of money to do it. And we're suspecting what they're going to see could be something like what has been reported since 1975, and that is a giant disk under the ice that continues to expand, being more open because of the melting ice. And every summer, of course, it opens a little wider because the ice is melting in certain parts of Antarctica, but it's also growing in certain parts of Antarctica. And Richard, when I came back from my trip, I had a 12-hour layover in Miami Beach. I went and laid down on the beach, and there is no discernible sign of the sea levels rising, at least not in Miami Beach. But if Antarctica were to completely slip off the continent and into the ocean, we'd be in big trouble, and then the sea levels would rise by 20, 30 feet, and Miami Beach would be gone.
Right. And there's a lot of calving that goes on, which is natural, and it happens every year, and big pieces of the ice shelf breaks off and so forth. That's what they call calving. We'll get into that a little bit because that's kind of a contentious issue. But back to this Fitbit data dump. Then, I guess ostensibly, people that go down there to this particular location, whether it's former Secretary of State John Kerry or the former patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, or maybe even Obama or Prince Harry or William or whomever it was, they're wearing their Fitbits. They go down to the Antarctic, and they are all going to one particular location, and it seems to coincide with where the rumor of this massive object seems to be emerging from the melting ice. Give us a sense of how big this is and where on the Antarctic continent it is.
Sure. Well, this is going to have to be speculation because I'll tell you, Richard, I went to a New Year's Eve party at the yacht club in Ushuaia, where all the captains that go down to Antarctica were there, and I talked to several of them. And then I talked to every scientist or station chief I could at the 6 different research stations that I visited when I was there. And I could not get any of them to confirm that there was this 3-mile disk under the ice. But I've seen pictures of it, and it's been spoken of in the circles that I speak at and research at. And to best pinpoint it are several different places. It may be near that Union Glacier because some of the Fitbit data, I know where the forward station is for this expedition group, and it is not where some of the Fitbit data is. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is the Beardmore Glacier. We've heard a lot about the Beardmore Glacier through Linda Moulton Howe has a new insider who speaks of a massive black basalt disk in the glacier that could possibly be this disk, although it doesn't sound like the pictures that I've seen. but her new insider name Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 speak quite extensively of this massive disk in the Beardmore Glacier. That's a very interesting location, too, because that is where the fossils were found by Shackleton and Scott, and even the very first person to the South Pole, Amundsen, had all seen fossils of ferns and even dinosaurs. And we can talk about some of the dinosaurs that are exclusive only to Antarctica. So this Beardmore Glacier is a possible candidate, and then there were some other locations that the Fitbit data revealed farther afield that could also pinpoint to where this craft may be, and that is what we collectively call the Illuminati Disneyland. If they are going to see something, it must be something very important to go way deep into the continent.
If it is, in fact, 2-3 miles in length, this craft, or whatever this object is that is emerging from the melting ice, that would, I would imagine, show up on Google Earth and satellite imagery, would it not?
Well, yes, it would. However, in my presentation that I'm going to give at all these conferences, I will show very conclusive evidence that Google Earth does mask certain locations and just puts like a white screen over it. And you can see it quite clearly because there's mountains that just cut off into what look like a white square put over it. There's also evidence that there could be antediluvian civilization down there, and sometimes Google Earth doesn't quite mask all of these locations, and there are some that look like pyramids or step pyramids or possibly a grid for a city. And I include some of these slides in my talk as well. But again, this is in the realm of speculation, Richard, and try as I might, these are difficult locations to get to, and I couldn't get any verification of these particular sites. But I did get one researcher who was telling me that there was a station on eastern Antarctica at the Belgrano 2 base, which is run by Argentina, that did have a sighting of UFOs and orbs late last year. So it was in this season that they did see something, and that the gossip between bases got to this base that I was at, the Brown base on the Palmer Peninsula, and one of the researchers told us about it when I was inquiring about the Illuminati Disneyland. So that was about all I could really get from someone down there to some of this UFO activity that we've heard so much about.
So I'll get back to the Illuminati Disneyland in a minute, but I just want to circle back very quickly since you just mentioned Belgrano 2 station. This is the Argentinian base. Where is that on the continent?
So we have to understand that Antarctica is actually two land masses. East Antarctica is the larger, more circular shaped where the South Pole is, and that is one of the oldest land masses on Earth at 3 billion years old, and some rocks on part of East Antarctica at 3.82 billion years old. So really the birth of the planet is when East Antarctica formed, while West Antarctica, which includes the Palmer Peninsula, is only 700 million years old, and that broke off from South America and created the Drake Passage that we had to sail over, one of the roughest seas of the world, and I can attest it was very rough, and two-thirds of our crew of 14 were throwing up within an hour from extreme seasickness for several days. And I lost about 20 pounds on this trip, Richard.
My word. Even in the summer, when it's summer down there in November, December, one would expect
Correct.
That's the best time to cross.
Well, it is the best time to cross because the days are the longest and the weather is the warmest, but it doesn't lessen the Drake Passage from being one of the roughest sea lanes in the world. And we did make it down in record time because we caught the tail end of this storm, but boy, was it rough seas. And our gear was flying across the cabin, all the kitchen cabinets emptied out, just banging around, and we were so sick we couldn't even get out of our bunks for 3 days.
It was
Did you
pretty
ever-
miserable. It was the worst of times, but then when we got down there, it was the best of times because the stark beauty of Antarctica is something otherworldly. It truly is. It's like you're going somewhere that isn't even here on this planet because the colors are different, the animals are not afraid of humans, and it's so cold and so stark and so drastic. They even test the Mars lunar rover in the dry valleys near McMurdo because it's so much like an alien planet.
Maybe perhaps more than we know. So Belgrano 2 Station, this Argentinian base on Antarctic, in Antarctica, they had a recent UFO sighting and orbs. Just tell me a little bit more about that. We've got about 2.5, 3 minutes here before we head into the break at the bottom of the hour.
Sure. So it was one of the researchers who I was asking all the questions that I asked at all the bases. And this gentleman was researching the ice fish, which are very, very interesting because they have no hemoglobin and their blood is white to survive in sub-freezing water. So he was a researcher down there, mainly a marine biologist. But when I asked about if he knew anything about a UFO in the ice, he said, well, not that, but there's another base, and it's just south of where the Nazi claim of New Schwabenland was. So that was kind of interesting to understand the location of the Belgrano 2 base. And he said that there was a night, but nights are very short in the summertime, but everybody on the base was alerted to something in the sky. They ran out and saw what they described as several disks and orbs that were passing over or around or near their base. And being that they have several other Argentinian bases in Antarctica, they just talked amongst themselves, and the word got back to this gentleman that I spoke to, and his eyes kind of lit up when I asked him about a UFO in the ice. He said, well, not in the ice, but in the sky. And at that time, it was only about a month ago, so it was still pretty fresh in his mind that this happened. But no contact or anything else. It was certainly a close encounter of the third kind.
When you are in Tierra del Fuego, I mean, I don't know. To me, it seems like one of these amazing sort of mystery, suspense novels, and maybe you're sitting, you're waiting for passage, you're waiting to hook on with an expedition or a captain of a ship to get over Drake's Passage. Maybe you're sitting around in a bar at night, and word gets round that Brad Olsen wants to visit the Illuminati playground. I'm wondering, I mean, were there suspicious characters around? Maybe they overheard a conversation. They knew that's where you wanted to go. Did you ever have the sense, Brad, that you were being followed, tracked, that others were keeping an eye on you?
Well, not so much that they were tracking me, but I was tracking them because I had to track down a captain who had a yacht that was sailing over there. It's very difficult to get on to these sailboat expeditions, but we were tipped off that most all captains always are hanging around and tinkering on their boats. So we went out to the dock where many of the sailboats leave for Antarctica and just started inquiring around. And it was through another captain that we found the Chief One sailboat, and they had a spot open for myself and my partner, Emily Infinity, and we got on to this 26-day excursion to Antarctica. And we were invited to the New Year's Eve party at the Yacht Club, and there I met some captains who had been going down there for decades. Some of them have even been to New Schwabenland and were looking for the little darts that were dropped by the Nazis and had explored around that area as well. Could not verify that there was anything unusual there or under ice bases or things that we've heard about. But being so vast of distances in Antarctica, it did ring up the possibility that it could be down there because there are more volcanoes on
Antarctica than any other continent. 92 active volcanoes down there, and there are known massive under ice chambers. So I guess it does give rise to the speculation that there could be activity in some of those large chambers. And of course, there's Lake Vostok, which is among the 10 largest lakes in the world, Richard. It's as big as Lake Ontario, one of our Great Lakes here in North America, trapped under the ice. And until 2012, when the Russians drilled down into it, had been untapped for hundreds of millions of years, and it is suspected that there could be alien life in that lake that is still yet discovered.
Were people on the vessel that you used to cross the Drake Passage? Was anyone aware that you were hoping to get to Illuminati Disneyland and to see this huge craft that's emerging from the ice? Was it sort of, were people gossiping about the fact that you were going there?
Well, certainly you have to interview with the captains, and we had 3 interviews with our captain, and I told him straight up, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to try to find. And I had been tipped off that I had to go to the Palmer Station first, which is run by the United States. And in fact, it was through my persistence that our boat was allowed to go ashore and visit the Palmer Station, which they only allow 10 boats a year to come to, so it is somewhat rare to be invited ashore. But when I was interviewing with my captain, I told him straight out who I was, what I was working on, and what I wanted to try to do. And he said, I'll do everything I can to try to facilitate that for you, but just keep in mind there's only so much time and only so much area that we can cover here. And as I mentioned before, Antarctica is a huge continent, and it would take many, many years to explore not only the coastline of Antarctica, but to do internal voyages inland. So we did the best we could, and cruise ships usually only get about 6 full days in Antarctica, while we had 15 full days in Antarctica, and then 4 days coming over the Drake on the way in, and then 6 on the way back. And we even got to check out Cape Horn, which is the mariner's holy grail. It's like every climber wants to see Mount Everest. Well, every mariner or sailor wants to see Cape Horn, and it is quite spectacular because that's the dividing line between the Atlantic and the Pacific, and that's why the Drake Passage is so rough.
Absolutely. Now, were any of the captains that you talked to, were any of them familiar with the fact or the supposition that people like former Secretary of State John Kerry or former Apollo astronaut Buzz Aldrin had been down there? Was anyone aware that, for example, the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, they had all been down there, recently to visit this site? Did any of them talk about it?
Yeah, they did. They did know that many of these elite personalities that we mentioned were going down there. I had a friend that worked at McMurdo Base last season, and he knew that Kerry was passing through the year before, and they had talked about it amongst themselves. Well, what are they doing down here? There was a little suspicion, but nobody could really pinpoint where they were going, and that's what makes some of their trips so interesting, especially John Kerry being the Secretary of State and being there right during the presidential election. You'd think he'd be up here in North America trying to get his candidate to win, but that wasn't the case, and he was down there for quite a period of time with a contingent from the State Department, and those are no small excursions. That there's quite a few people that are going with the Secretary of State on these trips, and that was a well-documented one. And then Buzz Aldrin, he was going in as more like a tourist. Prince Harry was doing this trip to the South Pole with some wounded soldiers, and the South Pole is a very difficult place to get to as well. It's very dry and high elevation, location. It's over 2 miles up in sea ice on the polar plateau, and extremely inhospitable temperatures and climates there, even though in the summer you do get the 24 hours of daylight at the South Pole. And Prince Harry was down there cross-country skiing. There's a picture of him that I have in my presentation that shows him and some of the guys crossing over the final degree of the South Pole and going there. And, of course, one thing we did find is that there is a no-fly zone over part of the South Pole, not exactly where the geographic South Pole is, but very close to nearby. And why that's very interesting, Richard, is because that's where the Antarctic explorer Richard Byrd said he flew over the South Pole and then saw an opening into another world very close to the South Pole, only 1 degree off. And indeed, that is a fact, that there is a major no-fly zone over a portion of the South Pole region.
Right, and according to his diary, when he flew over this area of the South Pole, he suddenly discovered amidst the ice this verdant landscape and supposedly saw what appeared to be sort of prehistoric creatures.
Yeah, and it was such a big opening that he was able to fly into this opening, and there was still enough room once he was in to maneuver his plane around and come back out. Now, of course, Richard Byrd was the admiral in charge of Operation High Jump, which went down as a so-called scientific mission, 1946-1947, as a 6-month journey, but they turned around after 2 months, and they came back with none of their aircraft and at least one of their ships left behind. And it is speculated that they were confronted with some kind of advanced technology enemy that basically had a disk that rose up out of the ice, confronted the Armada, and forced Admiral Byrd to hightail it and head on back. And now he kind of talked a little bit more than he should have, and he gave an interview with a Chilean newspaper on the way back and said that this proposed enemy that we may have could fly from pole to pole in a matter of hours. And we still don't have any kind of known craft that can fly from the South Pole to the North Pole in a matter of hours. This would be some kind of exotic craft. So for him to say that in 1946, 1947, when they were heading back, is something truly remarkable.
When you landed in the Palmer Peninsula, and this is a U.S. base, correct?
That's the Palmer base is named after the Palmer Peninsula. We went to 6 different research stations that were all active and manned with personnel, but the Palmer station is the American base, and of course we could speak English quite fluently there with the personnel at that base, more so than the other languages spoke at the other bases.
Right. When you arrive at one of these bases, whether it's a base that's controlled by the U.S. or whether one that's controlled by Argentina, do you have to have a passport to get to visit?
Well, that's what's so interesting, is that Antarctica is not owned by any country. It is completely autonomous. It's like a biosphere. Now, what happened was when we were going, we got stamped out of Argentina by the Argentinian Navy, who has to keep track of everybody that's leaving. But we were not stamped into anywhere. So we were kind of like in no man's land until we got back to Ushuaia 26 days later and then got stamped back into Argentina.
But when you land there, you just can't go anywhere you want, correct? Or can you?
No, but you can. That's what's so interesting about Antarctica. It is a continent like, say, our own national parks that are owned by the people. It is recognized through the Antarctica Treaty as being a reserve for nature and for science. And all the stations we went to, they're not military at all. In fact, military operations are forbidden in Antarctica in the Antarctic Treaty. and that they can only provide support, so bringing in supplies or an emergency evacuation, that sort of thing. So when you hear a lot of these stories of military expeditions in Antarctica, it makes me very suspect because I know it's not allowed. Now, of course, there could be secret missions going on that fly below the purview of the other nations who monitor the Antarctic Treaty, but the fact remains this is a world biosphere. The whole continent is a natural preserve, which technically belongs to all the people of Earth.
So, you didn't get to see the craft that's supposedly this 3-mile long, by some reports, this alien craft, perhaps, that's emerging from the ice. What's preventing you? What do you need in order to get that done, to get there?
That's a great question, and this is what I've been working with an expedition team that knows how to do it, and I was told who to talk to when I was on the Palmer base. And I followed up with that by going to their office in Punta Arenas, Chile when I got back, set up a meeting to understand the logistics of it, and have been put in touch with their logistics manager. And I've been sharing my photos and also sharing some GPS locations, and he's been helping me research it. He did not hear about it, and this guy, all he does is map and research Antarctica. Now, I'm heading to Salt Lake City next week for a follow-up meeting with this same group to see if we can get some more information on going down there. But because Antarctica is an open continent to all, if we were to come up with the GPS coordinates and mount an expedition down there, unless we were told specifically you cannot go there, it should be available and open to all. So technically, if we can find where this Illuminati Disneyland is specifically, it may be possible to actually mount an expedition. And I would be prepared to talk to any serious investor, and one of which came up to me after my talk at Contact in the Desert last year and said he wanted to finance it. Well, now I know how to do it. Now I know who to talk to and put this whole thing together. Not that I'm dying to get back down to Antarctica, although it is a fascinating destination. It's difficult travel. It's not like going to Thailand and stringing up a hammock and kicking it for 3 weeks. It's hard.
No, I have no doubt.
Travel.
I have no doubt. But I mean, Brad, we're heading into a break here. But seriously, if this thing exists, if there is an Illuminati Disneyland and there is an alien craft emerging from the ice that is 2-3 miles in length, I mean, this will not only blow the lid off the whole disclosure movement, it'll change everything we think we know about our history, our prehistory, who we are. They're not just going to let you waltz in there, are they?
Well, that's the big question, Richard. If it does exist, maybe it is disclosure waiting to happen. If the Antarctica Treaty is as rock solid as they say it is, then this should be like going into any national park, maybe deep well into it, where not many people go, but perhaps it will change the world. Perhaps it will be the kind of disclosure we need that'll blow the lid off of everything.
If you want to listen to our show ad-free 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now. So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared? Are extraterrestrials living among us? I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out. If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archived shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.